Well, welcome. Tonight, we're going to discuss one of the most critical positions in the town of Milford, at least from my opinion. We're going to talk about school committee and people who are willing to step up and not just talk about what should be done, but actually put their hat in the ring and do things. I mean, everybody always thinks about the selectmen and other positions in town as the most influential. I always thought it was the school. For anybody who has children, by the time my kids hit high school, I was lucky to get 2 hours a night with them. The people we're going to talk to coming up for school committee election, they dictate 6 hours, 8 hours a day of our children's lives and the policies that'll help sculpt them to get into colleges and beyond. So anybody who has a child in the school or who owns property in Milford, because if you don't think that the property values reflect the school system, you haven't been watching very closely. So enough of my pontification. Let's start with an introduction.
Thank you. My name is Christopher Wilson, and I am running for the Milford School Committee, and I am up for re-election this year for 2021.
Now, Chris, you've been through this before. You've put up with my questions. The first and last question, well, it's been 3 years since I did it to you before, is going to be the same as always. Chris, I'm from Milford. Why should I vote for you?
Thank you. Thank you for that. And first, thank you for having me on this program. I know I started 3 years ago with your program on my first bid for school committee. So like I said, I'm up for re-election and really just looking to continue on with what I've started on school committee. I've been living in Milford for 20 years now. I moved to Milford shortly after getting married. Currently have a house here in Milford and deep roots in Milford. So don't plan on moving anytime soon. I have 2 children that have started in the Milford school system down at Shining Star, and my son is a junior at Milford High School, and my daughter is a freshman at Milford High School. So certainly been invested in this town, invested in the education for them and in the education overall for their friends that they have created. And so that has inspired me to be part of the school committee 3 years ago. I looked at it as an opportunity to continue on with my involvement in the schools. I had started more at the basic level with the school councils, which was a school-based committee, and you'd go over school improvement plans and work with the principal of that building to understand what the day-to-day operations of that school were and how to improve on that school. So certainly from that, it kind of springboarded my need and wants to look into looking at the district and overall scheme. And that's why I looked at school committee, and that's why I ran 3 years ago. As far as this year, I just want to continue on with the oversight from of the superintendent, the policy, and the budget that I've learned about over the last 2 years.
Well, we can talk about the budget because I assume it's like always too much money and not enough to spend it on. But we'll go through details after. The hottest issue that seems immigration still is large, but the whole COVID-19 educational environment. What are your thoughts on what we're going through on the teaching practices now?
Obviously, COVID has a significant impact on education. Last spring, schools shut down and we had to transition to a remote learning platform that we weren't necessarily ready for. And certainly our teachers and our administration rallied around to develop curriculum in a very fast-paced manner to be able to distribute out to our students. It certainly wasn't without its speed bumps, and we learned through that process of how to get better. And it's affected the education of our students. How much it has affected, I think, remains to be seen. But certainly we've gone through and we've gone from a remote learning platform to we've created this hybrid platform, which at least allows our students to be face to face with teachers. Although it's not 5 days a week like it was in the past for students, it at least gives them the opportunity to be face to face with their teachers. And I certainly, as we learn more about COVID, I hope that we can develop our education to allow for more face to face time with teachers.
What in your mind is the biggest issue with going back into the classroom?
Certainly it's the social distancing aspect. CDC guidelines had originally started at 6 feet. So all of our classrooms had to, in a sense, be audited for space requirements. And a normal classroom that had the ability to have 20 desks for 20 students only was allowed to have 10 desks for 10 students. So that's why you saw that split of a cohort A and a cohort B. So a class of 20 became a class of 10. So certainly it, created that aspect of kids having to do some independent learning while the other cohorts were in class and doing, face-to-face and synchronous learning.
Now you talk about the CDC guidelines. Can we actually have in class safe educational space?
I hope so. Certainly we need to just continue to follow the expert and the expertise of the CDC. I think back in August, or even back when the pandemic started back in last March, we were very, very reserved and we were very, very cautious. And I think as time has gone on, we know that social distancing, we know that washing our hands, and we know that masking up are critical aspects of controlling the spread of this virus. My hope is that, as we develop and learn more, as we vaccinate our teachers and vaccinate our students, that we can reduce down those social distancing, that distance, to maybe a level, just say, hypothetically 3 feet. So now instead of a class of 10, can we get back to that class of 20? And I think that'll be important. So the more we learn, the more that we're able to roll out the vaccine and continue to, ensure that we are safe. Then we can bring students back in a safe manner. I think it's important too that, even if you look at other towns, when the rates of the town went up, it didn't mimic it as much in the schools. So I don't, can you say that the school and the town are two, in a sense, a little bit different communities? Because we do so well in the school community at ensuring that everybody is social distancing, that everybody has masks on, and everybody washes their hands frequently. Our staff does such a great job that it helps to control the spread of the virus.
Well, I've seen studies where in some of the cities, the transmission rate inside of schools is half what's outside. But then I worry. I'm concerned that you mentioned we should get our teachers vaccinated. And I wonder, why aren't they right behind the nurses? You know what I mean, Chris? It's like, I agree with you. They're right there on the front lines. And yet I haven't seen until the last week or so any mention of bumping up our teachers.
Yeah, that's a major issue. And unfortunately, at the school committee level, we don't really have control, but we can lobby our local government for it. One of my colleagues on the school committee developed a letter, and we voted in full in favor of 7-0 to send that letter along to the State House. So it's important, I think, for our representatives that represent our community and our state in general, that listen, if we are truly want to ensure the best education of our children, and that we can, in another hurdle that we need to overcome is having our teachers vaccinated. And I think that will also provide a level of comfort and reduce the anxiety for our teachers, because, everybody is, could have a family member that may have some type of other condition that may be susceptible to COVID. So that's always been a concern. And so we have to make sure that we can control, the spread of the virus. And obviously, one of the main features would be having everyone vaccinated.
Well, you read about it. I sit there and say, okay, let me think through this. An old Holy Cross alumni, Tony Fauci, he's a good satyr, came out and said, if you have any of the following 4 comorbidities, you have to take extra care. Okay, he points out, and I think he was reading one of the yearbooks that had my picture in it, because fat, old, diabetic. I mean, I rang 3 out of 4, and then he said anybody with heart conditions. I said, okay, I just rang 4 out of 4. So, anybody in my family that goes out is always worried that they're going to bring something home that could really nail me. But I haven't heard teachers say they don't want to go back in the classrooms. They don't want to go back in and teach kids direct, because why else would they be teachers? Right. Certainly it's not for the money. When you think about the better teachers, they could be making more money doing all sorts of jobs. What I have heard is they're scared to death because they haven't been vaccinated. I loved when our president said he wants everybody back in school as soon as we have the ventilation systems upgraded. And he went through a list of things that should be done. Well, being on the finance committee, I'm sitting there saying, upgrade the ventilation system just at the high school? What chance do we have of putting an environment? We don't have the funding. We don't have the time to do the ventilation. We do have the funding for PPE.
Mm-hmm. And I think that was something that I looked at back last summer to ensure that the ventilation systems were going to be adequate and reduce the spread of the virus. Certainly we knew that it was airborne back then, and we knew that any type of closed environment would, create situations where the spread could be more prevalent. So how do you do that? How do you reduce it? And that was a lot with fresh air, which was great in September, October, and part of November. Now we're in February and it's cold here in New England, and we have to have windows open and the heat on, to try to, again, maintain the amount of proper, fresh air. So yes, I think it was important to at least look at, our air systems and our HVAC systems to ensure that they were going to be adequate. If we found a significant deficiency, I think then we would have had to go to the town, go to the state, go to the government to ensure that we could finance the upgrades. There are other technologies out there and open that you can put into open spaces that aren't required. They're more like rolling platforms that help to clean the air. They'll disinfect the air. So if it came to that, I think that we should be able to look at those types of technologies. Certainly some of the open areas like a cafeteria. If we can roll in a piece of technology that is, scrubbing the air, disinfecting the air, and again, it helps reduce the anxiety level of our staff, and ultimately, if it does truly clean the air and reduce the spread, I think it certainly needs to be explored, and in taking into account what the cost is and what the health and safety benefit is.
So now, what chance do you think we have of getting the teachers moved up in the next week or two on priority so we get them vaccinated?
I think that's a very difficult question. I think that, we have to continue to lobby our governor and our legislative bodies, right? So the senators and the Congress of our local area, we've reached out to them. We've told them that we feel like it is very important for teachers to be vaccinated so that they can get into the classrooms and that we can, again, continue that face-to-face learning. So it's a very, very major uphill climb to be able to, in a sense, jump the line right now, because I feel like the line has been set and we have our place in the line. Right now, I think what we can hope for is that the rollout of the vaccine continues in a very, very efficient way. So that way, where we expect the teachers to get their vaccination, that it moves up in the timetable. But other than that, I mean, unfortunately, I just feel like we're kind of in a really tough spot to try to move them up. As frustrating and as much as I want them to move up, it's a difficult climb.
Well, you've been in a unique situation because you have two children in the school system. And obviously you've made a parental decision to keep them there. So you must feel they're relatively safe or you wouldn't send them, right?
I do. And I can look back in August, and I voted for a start with a remote model. And I think at that time, I didn't know enough about COVID. I didn't know enough about the transmission. And I think through the time, I've learned that we can be safe. My wife also works for a neighboring school, and so she has been in school full time since September 1st. So I look at that she has in a school system, she gets tested weekly. So it helps with her, in a sense, her anxiety by getting that weekly test. She's tested negative every time. So it allows me to be able to feel comfortable sending my own children there. And I know that their best education to me personally is by going into school, at least in this hybrid model. I see it from a personal side, the difficulties on the independent days to continue to, in a sense, be motivated. Or if you have questions, you can't just raise your hand and ask the teacher from inside the classroom. So again, it was important for me to have them in school as in face to face with their teacher as much as they could. So that's why I chose to have them go into the hybrid model.
Are you getting feedback from the community? Because I would imagine that parents today's way of life is that two income families are almost the norm. If one of them has to stay home, that's got to put a pinch on family finances.
Yes, certainly the decision back in early January to transition from remote back into the hybrid model, I think it certainly assisted families in how the outlook would be. Obviously, there was a modification to the school time schedule to try to minimize the amount of students in a lunchroom, right, where there's no mass. And at that time, we were still looking at the Milford numbers coming down, right? We had anticipated it coming down, and they did come down. So certainly when we made that vote, and then the teachers union did push back, and they had their concerns, and I understood why they had their concerns. So it certainly raised the eyebrow of the general community, and of the parents. And that's when the email started. And I think that we're now seeing a little bit more, or we're seeing a lot more community involvement from that aspect, and where parents are reaching out to me and expressing their thoughts. And I want to listen to them and understand how it is affecting their lives. Because as you had said, most families in Massachusetts need two incomes to be able to pay the rent or pay the mortgage and put food on the table. So certainly, we are a very diverse community. And I think that we need to understand that within that diversity, we've got to help out as many students and as many families as we can for allowing them to get back into school. And again, it boils down to the best education is going to be face to face with your teacher.
Now, in your mind, I'm hoping I know the answer, but I'll ask it. Are we controlling the aspects like PPE that we can control?
Yeah, so certainly there's the CARES Act, and then we have the CARES 2 Act, and that the government gave the school system money for purchasing of PPE, and that way we were able to distribute the PPE out to teachers. We also have it at the ready for any students that were to show up to school without a mask. So it's important that PPE has now become a tool, right? It's a text, like a textbook or a paper, pen, or a computer. PPE is something that the school needs to fund in order to keep our staff and our students safe. So with that, we need to continue to utilize the funds that were given to us through the CARES Act to purchase PPE and distribute it accordingly throughout the staff so that they can feel safe and be safe.
And to put in perspective, it's been pretty significant amounts of money that the school has spent.
It has, in the millions of dollars, obviously. But again, it's putting a cost on safety, which you don't want to have to do that, but you do. And the PPE is not, in a sense, just given to us. We have to ensure that we are buying the appropriate PPE, and then we're buying the appropriate quantities to be able to extend us through this pandemic, which we don't know where the end is right now.
Well, I guess my point was, initially, when this whole pandemic started, we couldn't buy N95 masks if we wanted them.
Right.
I mean, I remember having to buy a case of them for $600. It was ridiculous, but I had to use my lab supplier to supply so I could get them to people in Milford. I mean, now I don't see us running short of safety due to money.
Correct. And I think our administration and our facilities director, they did a great job at getting orders going for PPE way back last spring in anticipation of the need for a long term. So we were fortunate enough here in Milford to be able to acquire the appropriate amount of PPE to be able to start our school year and sustain us through. Like you said, it certainly has come at a financial cost, but it has not affected our normal school budget. Okay, so I think that's important. So all the PPE has come through with the CARES Act money, which has been a separate grant. So what we approved for a budget last year for papers, pens, pencils, Chromebooks, and teacher salaries, none of that has been affected by the need for PPE. If anything, right now we've actually saved a little bit when we did go into the remote learning aspect, because we didn't have to utilize some of our contract cleaning services in the evening time. So there was some money saved there.
Yeah, and rightfully so. I don't think anybody would really look at our budget and say, we can't squeeze a little bit here or there on the town side to provide masks for our teachers and kids.
Right.
Anybody with children certainly would think that's the biggest priority we have. Now, talk about budget. How are we doing?
Well, last year, obviously, we were very conservative with our budget. We just did basically our cost of living adjustments for our budget. We didn't go through with any initiatives. We weren't sure where Chapter 70, which is the monies that come from the State House to Milford, and Milford does pretty well in regards to the Chapter 70 funding that we receive from the state due to the diversity of our population. So budgets this year, we're looking at providing some direct labor into the classroom. And by direct labor, I mean, teachers that are going to work directly with students in the learning environment. I think that is going to be very, very important and imperative, because we don't know the effects yet of COVID on the education of our students. So when we look at the budget that's coming up this year, again, it's trying to, bring in new staff that are going to support the students, and other staff that are going to support the staff with curriculum development. So I think there's some tiered aspects to the budget where, we're looking at teachers and teacher support.
But now when you say bringing in more people, isn't that expanding an initiative?
Yes, exactly. So you use the buzzword of an initiative. So when we present the budget, we're going to have new initiatives that are on there. And so is that a new high school social studies teacher? And what we'll do is say, okay, we need a new high school social studies teacher because classroom sizes are getting large. They're in excess of, say, 25 students. So by bringing on a new social studies teacher, we can reduce that class level down to, say, 20 students. So is always a reasoning behind the need for the initiatives. And I think that's part of that is part of the budget process when the superintendent provides that budget that comes from the principals. There's always literature that backs up and justifies those initiatives.
But now, do initiatives ever go away? I mean, we always talk about adding new ones.
No, because I feel like the needs are always increasing within our town and within our community. We have that diverse community, and when that diverse community comes into our school system, we learn new ways and we've developed new strategies on how to educate. And I believe that's why you're constantly or continuing to see, and the school population is increasing too, why you see the need for increasing our staff numbers.
Now, how does the population increase look this year? Any idea yet?
Right now, it's a little bit down, but a lot of it has to do with Shining Star Preschool because the enrollment is down with Shining Star. Unfortunately, we haven't gotten the numbers yet from school committee. It's actually coming, I believe, next month. So we'll be able to understand exactly what the effects of COVID have been on our school population. I would guess that it's probably at least has maintained the same within the kindergarten through 12th grade, but that remains to really be seen.
But when you say it's a little down, I mean, for the first 40 years since I graduated, in 74, we added one child per year. I mean, I always kidded Kevin about the fact when he talked about population that my class, first one out of Milford High, was 222. And we were graduating 260 40 years later. So that kind of didn't sit with me very well because we weren't increasing the population. But the last 2 or 3 years, it seems like we went up as many kids in the last year and a half as we did the last 40. We were up 40, 50 kids. So when you say it's down, are we still up the 40 some children and we're just not going crazy adding them?
Yeah, the last number that I knew of, we were close to 4,500 students within the Milford Public Schools. So I'm not sure where that correlates from 10 years ago or 20 years ago. But again, looking back at the last few years, it has risen dramatically.
That's almost a new school. I mean, to put it in perspective, when you add 300 kids, because we always talked about 4,200, children in the schools, and all of a sudden it went to 4,500. I mean, I can't remember the exact number, but I think Brookside had 300 kids in the whole school.
Yeah, and a typical class right now is about 300 students. So, on average, some classes are larger than others, and there'll be over 300 students. So certainly, yeah, when you think about a few years back, if we were at 42 and now we're at 4,500, yes, we've added an entire grade level of students within our school system. And with that, needs more resources.
Well, but I think that's important that when we talk about adding teachers, adding new initiatives is always wonderful. That's gravy. We got to do it to keep up. But if you add 300 children and you don't want your class size, in my mind, to go up to 35 kids or whatever the ridiculous number would be, adding that sociology teacher or adding the social studies teacher just keeps everybody at the same 20 some kid per class level, right?
It does, but then there's also your support staff. So, within that 300 students of increase, there's going to be students that are going to require English language learning support. There's going to be kids on IEPs that are going to need special education support. And there's a variety of other supports that might be required for these students. So, the state mandates and the Department of Education mandates specific criteria and class sizes for some of these services. So it's important that some of these, or not, it is important to be able to maintain, our services appropriately. So therefore, some of the initiatives that you see are going to be driven based on the requirements of law.
Yeah, but that's the minimum, isn't it, Chris? What the state says is here's the minimum.
Exactly, and truly, and we have to, of course, at least meet those minimums, and we strive to reduce it down to be above and beyond those minimums.
So I was going to say, I don't remember town meeting ever skimping on taking care of our kids. Beacon Hill is wonderful, but they're not Milford, and they're not taking care of Milford kids. So,
I think town meeting has always done that for us too. And, the budget is reviewed, by the finance committee and brought to town meeting with either, favorable or unfavorable. But even before it gets to town meeting, there's many, many discussions and many questions and lots of answers that we have to give on the school committee to be able to, appease or not appease, I should say, or to justify the cost of those initiatives. So, we want to make sure that the people that are on FinCom, the people that are sitting there as town meeting members and vote on the budget, that they understand truly why we need these initiatives and justify the needs for our students. And as you said, they have always come to the table and come to bat for our students, but they also ask, I'm okay with them asking the tough questions of why.
Well, yeah, you have to, because we only have so much money. And what we dole out on one side, then you got your seniors and all who are also asking for relief. Now, when you look at the biggest challenges coming in the next school administration, what would you say they are?
Obviously, COVID is the greatest challenge, right? Getting our students back into school 5 days a week for what we would consider a traditional education. So first and foremost, we need to have a pathway of getting our students back into school 5 days a week. From there, I'd say the next one is really assessing what the effects on education this pandemic has had. I don't think we really know yet. We're certainly taking, tests to try to understand where kids are at from a grade level standpoint. But I think collectively, it's going to be very important to understand the effects educationally of COVID, and how do we support students moving forward to be able to, in a sense, catch up to the students that graduated a few years back. I think, and then the last part is just, understanding the budget and how best to, apply the budget in the best interest of our students.
Now, when you talk about the progress, are you in a position to comment on the rumor mill that's going around that the kids are actually keeping up? I've heard that the teachers have been very creative and the children aren't falling behind like people initially were worried about.
I don't have any of that data at my fingertips, and it hasn't been presented to us. I have heard that. But, as a mechanical engineer, I'm more of a data-driven person, and I like to see the actual, in a sense, reports. And I think that's important to know, to be able to see collectively, because we could have a section of the student population that is doing fine, but then there could be another section or percentage of the student population that's not, and they're dramatically behind. So what support services can we put in place to help bring them back up to the levels of where we expect them to be?
I think that's critical, because I'm glad the rumors are pointing north. If the rumors were all saying that the kids are way behind, it gets me more worried. Maybe it's a little optimistic, but I certainly would love to be in a situation that says we have pockets, small pockets of issues, get the rapid deployment force geared up to go after those versus a systemic issue.
Mm-hmm. And I think it's important too, there is the educational side of it that we have to look at, but then there's also this social emotional side of it. our students have not been in that typical learning environment with their friends. They haven't been able to be out in public and be with friends and be unmasked and be able to just be kids. So what is the toll on them from the social emotional side? And that has become a part of what we do in school too. So beyond what we do as far as teaching English, math, social studies, and sciences, part of what we now do in our schools is the social emotional side and really understanding students needs mentally to be able to assist them and ensure that if they're mentally ready to learn, they're going to be better learners.
And I think that's something that people forget. I mean, certainly you have a freshman going in. I had two freshmen going in. The biggest worry was not whether or not they'd be educated well. The biggest worry is how are they going to socially adapt?
Mm-hmm.
And it's got to be doubly hard. I mean, you think about your junior year, you start thinking about going to sports events, you start thinking about junior prom, all the things that let kids be kids. And I don't know the effect it's going to have on them because obviously you can't have a prom.
Right.
You can't do a lot of the social events. So, I mean, it's got to be something that we got to watch carefully in my mind. And I don't know how you address those things.
Yeah, and it's lasting effects and looking at it, we can assess the students where they are right now in their education process, and we can converse with them and try to understand where they are from a social emotional side. But where will they be in a few years, right? What was the lasting effects on them? And I think that from my side, I'm going to ask that type of question. I don't have the answer to that question, but I want to ensure that that question is asked and that we can put the proper staff in place to be able to assist students in any way possible to, again, to mitigate or to catch up with any type of educational deficiencies that we're having during this COVID pandemic.
Well, I think it's even more critical. Back in the old days, when Paul Revere and I went to Milford High, the teacher's job was to educate the kids. I think over the last couple decades, they've had to take on the raising function, not just teaching them subjects, but actually dealing with discipline issues and many things that we never had. I mean, I don't know if some of the parents weren't picking up all those aspects before the pandemic, it's got to be doubly hard now.
Yeah, I think certainly the appreciation for teachers has grown during the pandemic because the parents have had to work with their children as a teacher, and not every parent out there has that ability to do it, myself included. Certainly there were certain aspects of helping my children that I struggled with that my wife was able to jump in on. I was great with the math and science, but not as good with the English side of it. So for us it was helpful, but I believe the teachers are doing the best that they can with the tools that we've given them, and I just hope that we can continue on to continue on with great education here in Milford.
Now, long about this time of the year, the questions that we usually throw at the school committee is words like school choice. Have you heard anything about progress, backtracking, forward moving, what's happening on school choice?
Yeah, school choice is a $2.7 million line item that we don't like to talk about, I guess. We did a survey last year, and it was very inconclusive. There was, kids are leaving the district for a multitude of reasons. There's really no one single reason. But we still, just because we don't have a clear-cut answer, doesn't mean that we can just brush it off and just say, well, they're going to leave if they're going to leave. I think we still need to continue that conversation because again, it's $2.7 million. That's a significant, hit to our town finance. So we need to look at and understand why students are leaving. What I saw in the last couple of years is the biggest aspect were kids leaving to go to charter schools. So less students leaving to go to neighboring schools. That kind of hovered around the same amount. But again, more kids leaving to go out to the charter schools. So I think we need to understand from those families why they feel they're going to get a better education at a charter school as opposed to from Milford staff and Milford public schools. So again, continue on with the conversation, understand it. Let's not hide from it, and let's just try to at least try to improve our side of it from our school side and learn from it, so that way we can control those costs.
Some parents have brought up the fact that they think having such a large immigrant population in the school system holds back the local kids. Any comment?
I think we've always been, a country of diversity. The town that I grew up in southern Maine was diverse from from a French, Irish, and Italian population. Milford, over my 20 years here, is also a very diverse population of Portuguese and Brazilian and Italians, and every other aspect of heritage or from around the world. So, when you get out into the workforce, guess what? The same people you're going to be working with, and we've now become this global economy where you're dealing with resources from around the world. So embrace it. This is actually the opportunity to be able to understand other cultures and other heritages. So, when a student shows up and registers at Milford Public Schools, it's our duty to educate that student. And if that student shows up and cannot speak the English language well, it's our obligation to help that student speak the English language better and proficiently. So when they do graduate in grade 12, they're a very fluent speaker in English. So, is it a strain on the budget? No, I don't want to say it's a strain on the budget, because we get money, Chapter 70 money from the state to help offset that diversity. So that money is utilized in resources. So in compared to other towns, does Milford have more resources to help with the ELL population? Of course we do, because our ELL population is greater, but we also, again, we receive state money to help offset that. So from a burden standpoint from Milford, no, I don't think it's a burden. It's the state looks at our numbers and they assist us appropriately.
I think the biggest question is, will my child get a good education in Milford? Now, I think you have a biased view because you've opted to keep 2 children in the education system, but how do you answer that?
Again, going back to the diversity, I think that there's still the teacher's focus is on the curriculum that is developed from the state level and brought down to our schools. So, my 2 children, again, started at Shining Star, and they've gotten very, very good educations throughout the Milford public school systems. And I wouldn't lie if I said that it's a perfect system, right? It's not. There are bumps in the road, but also I feel like you can communicate very, very well with the staff throughout the Milford public schools. So if there is a bump, you reach out, you communicate, you resolve the situation, and then you continue to move on, you learn from it. The diversity within the classroom, certainly you're going to have different tiers of students within the classroom. And I think that I know that the teachers understand that, and they can teach and help to create, the learning environment to best help educate the diversity and the diverse learning of each student. Certainly looking at enrichment would be a great thing to do. So if there was ever extra money within our budget, looking at enrichment from the lower grade levels to help students that are in the high flyers, and keep pushing them along in what their interests would be, I think would be a great, great programs to look at throughout the schools.
And I remember back, oh God, 72, 73, when the enrichment program was sending kids to Dean Junior College, because we didn't have enough science programs in Milford. And Paul Raftery, God rest his soul, took a number of kids and said, well, the best I can do for you is go take biology and chemistry at a college level or junior college level. And then the last superintendent took pride, Tremblay and now Kevin seem to take real pride in going digital with classes. So I think children are getting the opportunity, aren't they?
They are, certainly, especially at the high school level with Project Lead the Way, which has certainly been a great opportunity for biomedical sciences. Thanks to town meeting members, we're going to, for the first phase, bring in a lot of more equipment, new equipment to help support that program. There are multiple AP classes for our high school students where they can take those classes and be challenged like it is at the college level. So certainly when you look at the high school programs and what we can do to enrich and challenge our students, I believe that we're doing a great job at that. When I talk enrichment, I'm thinking more at the lower level. So say, grade 1 up through grade 8. And how do we push those students at those lower levels and enrich those students at those lower levels? So when they do get up to the high school, they can continue on in these enrichment programs and beyond the walls of Milford High School.
So if you were given the magic wand and you could put in 2 new initiatives district-wide, what would you choose?
Again, I think, definitely an enrichment program down at the lower levels. I would want to understand from the education side and talk to the principals what grade levels that would be best suited for. And then also, I think we need to continue with the development of our in a sense, our trades programs within Milford Public Schools and in the high school. A quarter of the Milford graduating class does not go on to college. They go out into our workforce. So I think it's important to understand what the workforce needs are out there and continue to develop programs to get our students ready for life beyond Milford Public Schools. So I would certainly look at in a sense twofold, where you're enriching, but you're looking at understanding what the needs will be for students that will not pursue a college career or college education.
And that's always a sensitive subject, because when we grew up in Milford, if you were going to go to college, you stayed in Milford High and you went to college. If you were going to get a trade, you went to BVT. But now to get into BVT, you have to be in the top academic percentages of the class. So what do you do? And I'll make it personal. People like my father, put him in organic chemistry when he came over from Portugal, he would have failed miserably. Give the man a tool. And he was an artist. And I worry about the kids like my dad, who academically, they wouldn't do well in a traditional program. But God, as a craftsman, they could really, really have a good living. What do you do now?
Right. So we have to look at programs that we can develop within our school, again, to help those students, because certainly there are some extremely successful people within the Milford community that are, the ones that we call when we want to renovate our house, or we want to upgrade our kitchen, or we need a new bathroom, right? Or, we want to spruce up the outside of our house, right? So all of those are wonderful opportunities for, various students within the Milford Public Schools. So looking at those programs, understanding what the community needs, what the state needs, in developing programs to help build the foundation. So when they do graduate, they have an understanding of of the program of the workforce, right? So maybe, they start in the building trades program, but they don't like it very much. But it gave them the opportunity to understand, like, hey, listen, this just isn't for me. But they can go over to the hotel and hospitality, and they're like, geez, this was a great program. I really enjoyed interacting with people. I enjoyed, developing the different aspects of the hotel industry and what it would take. So providing them the opportunities to be able to see what is out there workforce wise, and being able to develop, and giving them, the chance.
Well, I think it's critical. I mean, you mentioned that we're upgrading the science wing. Well, not the physical wing, but the equipment.
Equipment.
And you start thinking about what a driver biotech is in the Massachusetts economy. And these jobs, they're starting out coming out of school at 55, 60 grand a year. That's a nice salary. I certainly never started there.
Right. I think it's important to know that there's different aspects of that biomedical field, right? You've got people that are going to develop the equipment. You're going to need people to operate the equipment. You're going to need people to fix the equipment. So there's so many levels of support within the biomedical field, that by introducing students to it, boy, they can get a great foothold of what they're looking to do in their next phase in life.
Yeah, and I mean, I think it's key. You've hit on it. The traditional path of, I want to have a son or a daughter who's a doctor or a lawyer. To go into medicine today, it's not like when I grew up here and you had 4 doctors taking care of all of Milford. Now they work very, very hard for their money. The new primary care physician group, it's harder to get them because they're not getting paid like they used to. And, they're not being able to spend half an hour with you. They got to spend 15 minutes or 13.2 minutes before they turn around.
Right.
But I think helping kids understand that you can have an incredible career with a biology background, a chemistry background, an engineering background. But you got to introduce it to them early.
Yeah. And I think the beauty of being here in Milford and just Massachusetts and in America is, any opportunity you want to take, you can go for it. There's nothing holding you back from what you feel you're interested in. Go pursue it. Ask questions, find out information. So I think that aspect is what you'd want our students to do with the teachers and the administration of, hey, I've got an interest in this career. Can you give me some information? And if we have a number of students that we find are interested in that, then again, we can look at developing programs to be able to support it. But again, go and find your passion and follow it.
Have you heard anything about test scores? It seems like with COVID, all the oxygen's out of the room.
Right now, so MCAS are going to happen. So we haven't reviewed. No, actually, sorry. Last year they did not happen. Right. So there won't be any test scores to review. We will be looking at testing our students. Certainly, it's a little bit difficult, or a lot difficult, because of the amount of students that are allowed into the school at one time and social distancing. So it's certainly going to put a lot of stress on administration as far as how to administer the test to the students appropriately. Is it important? Sure. I feel like it at least gives you the ability to test students and get some feedback again of where we're at. It's where the MCAS tests, it's testing the students' knowledge, but it's checking on how we are delivering the education to our students. And I certainly would never want our teachers to teach to the tests, but I feel like a standardized test just at least gives us the ability to look from year to year of how we're doing as a school district, and let's not compare our numbers to, a community that surrounds us that doesn't have the same level of diversity, but let's continue to compare ourselves to ourselves to ensure that we are improving from a year to year basis.
Yeah, but even then, I mean, I got educated by an old principal, Tommy Davern, because he took pride in his 8th graders. He said, if you looked at Milford's distribution, it was very bimodal. You had the kids who were just coming over to this country who, in the first few years, they're not going to test as high. I mean, if you put me into Beijing and gave me a test in Mandarin and said I have a year to prepare, don't know that I would do very well. But he made it a point, and he showed me the data back then, that he said, I'll put my top kids up against anybody else's, and I won't come up short.
Exactly. And at a recent school committee meeting, it was brought up that we had an academic team that did very, very well at the statewide competition. Obviously, it was a little bit different because it was over Zoom. But again, our top students are getting and can, be as well educated as any student within the state of Massachusetts or the United States.
And I think that's the key that parents have to understand. And, we're sitting here coming April 1st, your report card comes out. Because you can say anything you want. You can bring up any data you want. To me, the ultimate judge is all the colleges. Do they accept Milford kids?
Right. Right. And we want to make sure we prepare them for that, correct? We want them to be successful.
And that's your job. I mean, at the end of the day, my mind, I'll rate or judge or evaluate everything in the world. But at the end of the day, my daughter got into every school she wanted. My other daughter only applied to one school, which scared the heck out of me because it was Holy Cross and I didn't think she could get in. But that to me tells me that you're doing a good job, because Ivy League schools wouldn't accept our kids.
Exactly. And I think you look at the past few years and we've done just that. We have students going on to very, very good schools within the United States. So, certainly I feel like we're doing a good job educating our students and preparing them to be accepted at these schools. When we need to get a report back if they're being successful at school. And I know that Josh Allen does a good job at looking at that and tracking the success rate of our students as they go on to college. So, but if they can get their foot in the door, that
they'll do well.
They're going to do well. Exactly.
Chris, we're at the point where I have to ask you, I'm from Milford. Why should I vote for you?
Well, again, thank you for having me on the show and the ability to connect with your viewers out in the Milford audience. So, again, my name is Christopher Wilson. I'm up for re-election for the Milford School Committee. I've been here in Milford, lived here for the last 20 years with my wife and 2 children. I am a mechanical engineer and work locally at a technology firm. So I want to utilize, what I've learned with my children being in the schools, and just my engineering background on how to look at problems and problem solve to be able to bring it to the Milford school system, where we're looking at budgets, we're looking at policy, and we're overseeing the superintendent. And I think it's very important that what I've learned over the last few years to bring that experience to the Milford school system as we continue along in this COVID pandemic and look at how we're going to assess our students' educations and continue to move it forward successfully in the future.
Thank you. And thank you more than anything for being one of the people who's stepping up to make a difference. And as always, I've always said on this show, I will never ask you to vote for a specific candidate, but I'll beg you to vote. This position, the positions of school committee, make all the difference in the world in our children's lives. So as I always say, thanks for joining. Good night. To our 6 loyal viewers, I appreciate you tuning in. May tomorrow be a better night than tonight. And get out to vote.
Not too long since I've been home. Been running all my life just